Shocker. Carlin Bates and Evan Stewart headed for divorce? They had always been the picture of a perfect couple, Carlin Bates and Evan Stewart. From the outside, their world glowed with laughter, worship songs, and the tender chaos of young love. Their smiles were bright, their love seemed steady, and the world believed in their forever. But behind the glow of family photos and social media perfection, something delicate had begun to crack. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight or a single moment of blame. It was silence, slow and visible, and heavy. Carlin had always been the dreamer. She saw life in colors, believed that love could fix everything, and prayed with the kind of faith that made others want to believe too. Evan was steady, the calm to her fire, the quiet balance to her laughter. Together, they built a home filled with music, prayer, and the sound of their little one's laughter echoing through the walls. But time has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. It began with exhaustion. Long nights. Missed conversations. Moments that used to end in shared jokes now ended in tired sighs. The joy that once felt effortless began to feel like work, and neither of them could quite say why. Carlin would stare at the dinner table long after Evan had gone to bed. She would trace her finger along the edge of her cup and whisper quiet prayers into the emptiness. God, please make it right again. Evan, in his own way, prayed too, though sometimes his prayers sounded more like questions than hope. They loved each other. That was never the problem. But love, when stretched too far without rest, begins to fray. There were no villains in their story. Only two hearts that once moved in perfect rhythm, now beating to different tempos. She wanted to talk. He wanted peace. She wanted connection. He wanted quiet. And in between those differences, they slowly began to lose the language of us. Days turned into months, and the silence grew heavier. At church, they still smiled for the congregation. At home, they spoke mostly about the baby, about schedules, about things that mattered, just not the things that hurt. And yet, in the quiet moments, both of them felt the ache of something slipping away. Carlin began journaling again. Evan spent more time on the porch, guitar in hand, playing songs he never finished. They were both trying, just not together anymore. There was no explosion, no shouting, no storm. Only a quiet acceptance that love, as pure as it once was, had changed. And as autumn light fell over their small Tennessee home, Carlin finally looked at the wedding ring she had worn with such pride and whispered through tears, "Maybe love doesn't always mean forever. Maybe sometimes it just means we loved with everything we had, until we couldn't anymore." Carlin moved slower now. She'd stand by the window longer than usual, watching sunlight slip through the curtains, falling on the same table where laughter once lived. She still wore her ring for a few weeks, not because she couldn't let go, but because taking it off felt like erasing years she still believed in. Evan, meanwhile, found himself lost in silence he used to crave. The quiet wasn't peace anymore, it was an echo. Every familiar sound reminded him of something that wasn't there. Her voice calling from the other room, the way she'd hum while folding laundry, the way their daughter's giggle would make her laugh harder. People around them tried to be gentle. Friends spoke softly, church members whispered prayers, family reached out with love. But even kindness felt heavy when your heart is learning how to live differently. Carlin tried to stay strong for their daughter. Every bedtime story became a quiet act of faith, a promise to herself that joy could exist again, even if it looked different now. But there were nights when she'd tuck her child in, step into the hallway, and break down, the sound of her sobs swallowed by the dark. Evan wasn't untouched by the pain. He replayed every word, every silence, wondering where love had slipped through their fingers. He went to church one Sunday and sat in the back pew alone. When the choir sang about grace, he felt tears burn his eyes. He had always believed faith could fix anything. But now he was learning that sometimes faith doesn't fix what's broken. It just teaches you how to carry the pieces. Their story became something whispered, not spoken. The world that once cheered for them now looked on with quiet sadness. But beneath the ache, something fragile began to grow. Understanding. Carlin started painting again, colors bleeding across canvas like the feelings she couldn't say aloud. Evan began writing songs, not for anyone else, just for himself, as if melody could make sense of loss. They didn't hate each other. They couldn't. They had loved too deeply for that. But love had changed shape. from holding on to letting go, from needing each other to wishing each other peace. Months passed, and the pain softened, not gone but gentler, like a scar that still aches when it rains. Sometimes, they'd meet when exchanging their daughter, offering small smiles that said more than words ever could. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. It was respect. It was history. It was love, reshaped, refined, and quiet. And one evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Carlin wrote in her journal, "Maybe this is what healing looks like, learning to forgive what life didn't give us, and thanking God for what it did." Time didn't heal everything. It simply taught them how to live with what remained. The ache that once lived in every heartbeat became softer, like a familiar melody playing in the background of new days. Carlin had learned to breathe again. Her mornings started with coffee and a little girl's laughter echoing through the kitchen. The pain was still there, tucked between the moments of joy, but it no longer controlled her. She had stopped asking why and started whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for what was. Thank you for what still is. Thank you for what's to come." Her faith had changed. It wasn't loud anymore. No shouting prayers or constant striving for perfection. It was quiet, steady, a kind of peace that came only after breaking. She understood now that faith wasn't about holding everything together. It was about trusting that even in the falling apart, God was still writing something good. Evan, too, had grown. The porch where he once sat lost in silence had become his sanctuary again. He played his guitar each evening, the notes softer, wiser. His songs weren't about regret anymore. They were about grace. Sometimes he'd look up at the stars and think about her, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. They had shared something rare, love that had been true, even if it hadn't lasted forever. They saw each other often, exchanging their daughter, sharing smiles that no longer hurt. There was understanding now, and a gentle respect that only time could build. Their love had taken a new form, one that no longer needed to be romantic to be real. People whispered less now. The noise had faded, and in its place grew silence. Not the heavy, painful kind they once knew, but a quiet peace. Carlin painted a new series one day, soft tones of gold and sky blue. She named it Afterlight. It wasn't about endings. It was about what happens after, when you realize the world is still beautiful, even when it's changed. Evan heard about the paintings and smiled. He sent her a message, simple, honest. "They're beautiful. You always had a way of finding light." She replied, "Maybe we both did, just in different ways." That night, Carlin stood by her window, the same window where once she had prayed for things to stay the same. Now she whispered something different, a thank you for the courage to let go, and the grace to begin again. Outside, the sky was fading into gold, and somewhere far off, a song played. The kind that makes you remember, but doesn't make you cry anymore. Because love hadn't disappeared. It had simply transformed. Into peace, into understanding, into the quiet knowing that some stories don't end in forever. They end in freedom, in faith, and in the gentle return of light. Love doesn't always leave the way we expect it to. Sometimes it slips away gently, like sunlight fading through the trees at the end of a long day, soft, unannounced, but certain. And yet, what it leaves behind can still be something beautiful. Carlin had once believed that love meant forever, that holding on was proof of strength. Now she knew that sometimes, the real strength is in letting go without losing tenderness. Her heart, once fractured, had learned how to beat differently, slower, steadier, wiser. She didn't see herself as broken anymore. She was simply changed. Evan had learned too, that love was never ownership, never about being right, never about winning. It was about giving, forgiving, and remembering without regret. He carried memories not as wounds, but as reminders of a time when he had loved with everything he had. The world moved on around them. New seasons came. The baby grew, laughter returned, and life found new rhythms. And somewhere between those quiet mornings and slow sunsets, they both discovered something they hadn't expected to find again. Peace. It wasn't the same peace they once prayed for. It was gentler, born from surrender, from acceptance, from grace. Sometimes Carlin would still catch herself humming one of Evan's old melodies while painting. Sometimes Evan would see her in a crowd, holding their daughter's hand, and feel a quiet pride that no distance could erase. They had loved, they had lost, and they had lived. And maybe that was enough. Because not every story has to end in reunion. Some stories end in understanding, some in forgiveness, and some simply in the knowing that love, real love, doesn't vanish when the chapter closes. It lingers in the lessons, in the growth, in the kindness we carry forward. Years later, their daughter would look through old photographs of her parents young and radiant, smiling into a camera that couldn't see the future. And she would understand that what they shared wasn't a failure. It was a foundation, proof that love, even when it changes, still leaves light behind. And so their story became not a tragedy, but a quiet hymn of grace. Two souls who walked together for a time, teaching each other what it means to love, to break, to forgive, and to begin again. When the credits of life roll softly, and the noise fades, what remains is not the ending, but the love that once was, and the peace that finally came. There are some goodbyes that never sound like goodbyes. They happen in small moments. In a quiet glance, a half smile, a whispered "take care," that carries more love than any promise ever could. That was how their story ended. Not with anger, not with noise, but with peace. Carlin stood in the doorway of the home they once built together. The walls still held echoes, laughter, tears, lullabies, prayers. She ran her fingers along the frame of the door and smiled softly, painfully. It didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like gratitude. Gratitude that she had known love so pure it could still ache after everything. She had found herself again, piece by piece. Through sleepless nights, through the weight of memory, through the quiet strength of faith that never let go of her hand. She wasn't the same woman who once believed that love had to be perfect to be real. She now knew. Love was meant to be honest, even when it hurt. Evan stood outside waiting, hands in his pockets, heart heavy but calm. They hadn't seen each other for weeks. Life had taken them in different directions, but this moment, this one was meant to happen. Their daughter played nearby, her laughter breaking the silence between them like sunlight through clouds. Carlin looked up, their eyes met, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. Like everything unsaid between them hung in the air, shimmering with memory. No words came. None were needed. He nodded. She smiled. And that was enough. It wasn't closure. It was continuation. A softer chapter, written in understanding rather than longing. As Evan turned to leave, the wind caught her hair, and for the briefest second, she thought she heard the echo of their old song. The one they used to sing on long drives, when the future still felt infinite. And instead of pain, she felt peace. Later that night, after putting her daughter to bed, Carlin sat by the window again. The same window that had witnessed her prayers, her tears, her healing. The sky outside was a deep, forgiving blue. She whispered quietly, "Thank you." Not for what she lost, but for what she had, for what she learned, and for the light that still lived inside her. Because love, real love, doesn't die when the people change. It becomes something eternal, a pulse in the soul, a memory in the quiet, a light that never truly fades. And as the moon rose above the Tennessee hills, the house stood still, no longer broken, no longer sad. Just quiet, just alive, just filled with the last light of something beautiful that had once been, and would always be.